It is well known by many who profess to be traditional Catholics that the third secret of Fatima relates to the great apostasy, which we are currently experiencing. Less known may be the fact that there are also visions from Fatima which speak of a suffering pope, not sedevacantism. This is from thepopeinred.com/1988.htm or www.thepopeinred.com/1988.htm to be more specific, right? It says, 2 approbated visions of Jacinta Marto of a future pope. It says, I saw the Holy Father in a very big house. Shortly after the 3 children received Our Lady of Fatima's secret in July 1917 AD, Jacinta Marto had 2 visions which she recounted to Lucia, who recorded them in her memoirs with the remark that they comprise part of the third secret. Both visions concern a future pope. And we see an image of Jacinta Marto there. The quote for the vision states, I don't know how it happened, but I saw the Holy Father in a very big house, kneeling by a table with his head buried in his hands, and he was weeping. Outside the house, there were many people. Some of them were throwing stones, others were cursing him and using bad language. Poor Holy Father, we must pray very much for him. So even Fatima spoke of a persecuted and suffering pope. You know, the visions from Fatima, the prophecies of Fatima. They spoke of a persecuted and suffering pope. Nothing of sedevacantism, because sedevacantism is not what is actually going on. The true pope is being persecuted and eclipsed by antipopes. And as I keep hammering home, because sedevacantists don't see a pope, since the pope is hidden from the world, they falsely assume that there therefore is no pope, which is not true. All right, so also, Sister Lucia said that the chastisement from God would occur before 1960. The election of anti-Pope John the 23rd in 1958 was the fulfillment of this. I mean, it's almost to the year. It's literally just 2 years before 1960, right? It's like, come on. Sister Lucia tells Father Fuentes in a 1957 interview that we are in the last times. Sister Lucia to Father Fuentes, December 1957. She, the Blessed Virgin, told me that the devil is in the mood for engaging in a decisive battle against the Virgin. And a decisive battle is the final battle where one side will be victorious and the other side will suffer defeat. Hence, from now on, we must choose sides. Either we are for God or we are for the devil. There is no other possibility. And I want to mention briefly here, you see how she mentions the devil is in the mood for a decisive battle, engaging in a decisive battle against the Virgin. You can see how godless, how truly filthy the world is by the fact that they make fun of people for being virgins. Like if, say, a man is a virgin, they're like, oh, he's a virgin. Yeah, that's a good thing. He should be a virgin if he's not married. But the world is so filthy that they mock even being a virgin. It's just, the world is so horrible, man. So horrible. Oh my goodness, man. Let's continue reading this excerpt here. Father Fuentes, she's talking to Father Fuentes. Father, the Blessed Virgin is very sad because no one heeds her message, neither the good nor the bad. The good continue on with their life of virtue and apostolate, but they do not unite their lives to the message of Fatima. Sinners keep following the road of evil because they do not see the terrible chastisement about to befall them. Believe me, Father, God is going to punish the world, and very soon. The chastisement of heaven is imminent. In less than 2 years, 1960 will be here, and the chastisement of heaven will come, and it will be very great. Tell souls to fear not only the material punishment that will befall us if we do not pray and do penance, but most of all, the souls who will go to hell. Exact words of Sister Lucy, visionary at Fatima, in an interview with Father Augustin Fuentes on December 26, 1957 AD, giving clear forewarning that the imminent chastisement of heaven for man's sins would unmistakably occur before 1960 AD, which it precisely did 10 months later on October 26, 1958 AD, with the usurpation of the papal chair from Christ's lawful vicar, Pope Gregory the 17th. Okay? And I want to mention something. In the, what section was it? I think it was in the, when I was talking about Russia and Pope Gregory the 18th and stuff, I mentioned the prophecy saying that, the Pope and his cardinals will flee Rome to a place where they'll be unknown. I said, I don't know where exactly he's located. I don't know if he's in Italy, if he's in, America, Germany. I don't know where exactly the Pope currently is. And I mentioned that I don't know if he's in Rome, if he's hidden in Rome, for example. And I had a thought that someone might, try to claim that basically that would be a contradiction if he's hidden in Rome, because the prophecy said he, fled Rome to a place where he'd be unknown, right? But just because he fled Rome at a certain point doesn't mean that he will never, ever be in Rome ever again. He went to Rome secretly in 1991. So I don't know if he went to Rome secretly again at some other time, so just to clear that up. I don't know exactly where he is. It doesn't mean he has to stay in one place for all the years he's not, ruling Rome, But anyways, so yeah, the election of John the 23rd, anti-Pope John the 23rd, was clearly the fulfillment of this. Yeah, right before 1960, all that kind of stuff. All right, and I'm trying to see if there's something else here I wanted to talk about. Let me see. God's going to punish the world very soon. Oh yeah, I think Sister Lucia is also quoted as saying that basically the chastisement from God will be so terrible that one ought to pray day and night. And I totally understand, it's when you can see how horrible the world is, the danger of hell, the complete wickedness you're surrounded by is you should honestly just, even when you're not saying formal prayers like the rosary or from a missal and stuff like that, honestly, just all day, you should just be begging God for mercy. I'm not even kidding, just constantly just begging God for mercy, just as a perpetual habit. Just always just begging God for mercy, just all day, just keep begging for mercy repeatedly. All right. So this is from todayscatholicworld.com/April 8th, tcw.htm. It says, the well-known prelate, Cardinal Ottaviani, who read the actual text of the third secret of Fatima, which was given by the Blessed Virgin Mary to the children of Fatima, said that it, the third secret, tells that the great apostasy will begin at the top. Okay, and of course you had the election of the anti-Pope John 23rd. You had, the Vatican II Apostate Council, that kind of stuff. So yeah. So reading the slides here. Vatican II and modernism taking over, anti-popes eclipsing and persecuting the true pope, that is the fulfillment of the prophecies of Fatima. There is also a prophecy which is claimed to be the actual third secret of Fatima and speaks explicitly of an evil council. Okay, so this excerpt here is claimed to be the actual third secret itself, not just someone's sharing what they saw, but actually the text, as far as I'm aware here. It says, in May of 1994, 77 years after Our Lady first appeared to the three children at Fatima, Portugal, a French priest was listening to a CD entitled Mysterium Fidei, with lyrics and sung by French choirs. As he was listening devoutly, Suddenly the music faded into the background, and a clear voice, which was perceived quite normally and not as an interior inspiration, said, "L'église Sagnera de futes se playes." I don't even know what language that is, so I hope I said it decently. That is, let me say l'église. Is that French? Oh, I said he's a French priest, right? Okay, yeah, it's French. All right. That is, the church will bleed from all her wounds. Then there followed this text. There will be a wicked counsel planned and prepared that will change the countenance of the church. Many will lose the faith. Confusion will reign everywhere. The sheep will search for their shepherds in vain. A schism will tear apart the holy tunic of my son. This will be the end of times, foretold in the Holy Scriptures and recalled to memory by me in many places. The abomination of abominations will reach its peak, and it will bring the chastisement announced at La Salette. My son's arm, which I will not be able to hold back anymore, will punish this poor world, which must expiate its crimes. One will only speak about wars and revolutions. The elements of nature will be unchained and will cause anguish even among the best, the most courageous. The church will bleed from all her wounds. Happy are they who will persevere and search for refuge in my heart, because in the end, my immaculate heart will triumph. After this, the priest heard only one more sentence. This is the third secret of Fatima. So note here, it says the sheep will search for their shepherds in vain. Why? Because it is almost impossible to find a Catholic priest today. And by a Catholic priest, I mean one in communion with the true Pope, with Pope Gregory XVIII. But you can easily find tons of Sedevacantists, SSPX, of course, Novus Ordo, etc. They are not the shepherds of the church. They are schismatics and heretics outside the church. Okay? They're not the Catholic hierarchy. So-called Sedevacantists, so-called priests and bishops are not the Catholic hierarchy. Now we'll look at an article from TCW. Anyone who's honest with themselves knows this is true, right? If you believe the truth, of course, you know this for sure. 99% of Sedevacantist so-called priests and bishops are heretics. They profess either Fenianism or indifferentism. That's basically true for almost all of them. They're either Feniates or indifferentists. That's it. I've never personally met one that could clearly articulate the church's teaching. Never. I've not met a single one of them. There are only two that I spoke to who did not clearly and firmly profess Fenianism or indifferentism. They were kind of one of them. That's the difficult thing is these people is unfortunate because these so-called priests and stuff, I would have to say they're very incompetent because, of course, most of them teach heresy, period. So that's just incompetence right there to begin with. But even the ones who don't seem to clearly and firmly profess heresy are still not, I guess, educated enough and do not have a clear enough understanding of the church's teaching on salvation. There's no reason why in the middle of an apostasy, when the entire world is heretical and godless and blasphemous and teaching garbage about salvation, that you should claim to be a Catholic priest and not be diligent in understanding the church's teaching on salvation. That doesn't seem reasonable to me, right? There's no reason why a layman like myself should understand the church's teaching on salvation better than you who claim to be a Catholic priest. That's just no, especially today when you're surrounded by nothing but heresy. That should be the main thing you seek to understand, claiming to be a Catholic priest, because you should equip yourself with the ability to properly educate your parishioners, or so-called parishioners, however you want to say it. And one of the so-called priests I spoke to, I don't even The only thing I can say is that he didn't clearly profess indifferentism or Fenianism. And when I expressed the true position to him, he, agreed with me. But I can't say I had a strong confidence in his agreement because he didn't seem like he was confident in knowing the church's teaching. It was kind of like I had to pull teeth to try to get a clear answer out of him. I shouldn't have to do that. I shouldn't have to pull a so-called priest's teeth to get him to say what the church teaches, man. That's ridiculous. And then there's a second individual I spoke to who, he, once again, he didn't clearly profess Fenianism or indifferentism, but I had to pull teeth to get him to finally say something clear. And he seemed to agree with the truth, but his understanding was so hazy. He couldn't articulate it clearly, which is not good. You shouldn't be walking around calling yourself a Catholic priest during the great apostasy, surrounded by nothing but heretics teaching that, pagans and Protestants go to heaven, and you don't understand what the church teaches on salvation. There's a problem with that. There's something wrong with that. You shouldn't be walking around incompetent on salvation and calling yourself a Catholic priest, man. No. A layman, perhaps. Perhaps a layman, I could be like, okay, a layman just believe the truth, and you're just a layman. You're not obligated unless God, specifically wants you to be like, some expert on certain subjects. But you're calling yourself a Catholic priest and you don't know what the church teaches on salvation, or at least you can't articulate that clearly to a layman who wants to, who's asking you about it. That's a problem, man. That's a problem. Something's very wrong with that. And regarding that second person, well, the first person, I guess I could say their name. The first person is called, quote unquote, Bishop Masick. They're actually they work with the Gabriel Tethero guy, who is definitely a Feniite heretic. And God willing, we'll cover his heresy later in this presentation. But the quote unquote Bishop Masick guy, when I spoke to him at least, didn't seem to be a Feniite, which is weird because I'm like, okay, I didn't say this, but I'm like, now that I'm thinking back, I'm like, these people, they don't even have true zeal for the church's teaching, because if, let's say Masick, right? Let's say Masick believes the truth about salvation. He's not a Feniite or an indifferentist. Why then would you be working closely with a Feniite who's teaching heresy? You know what I mean? So although he wouldn't be an indifferentist in terms of salvation, his belief on salvation, he would be an indifferentist in the sense of not having, a proper aversion to someone teaching heresy. He would be indifferent in that regard, in a more, I guess, secular meaning of the word. And then the second person, I don't want to say their name because as far as I recall, they really, really don't like being, I guess, the subject of public attention, or criticized publicly, for example, they didn't want, I think they didn't contact the Diamonds because they didn't want the Diamonds to make a video, condemning them and stuff like that, So out of, I guess, a certain degree of, I guess, charity in some regard, I won't say their name, right? For that reason. So they don't have to, I guess, suffer the public criticism that they don't want to suffer. But regardless of that, me saying their name is not really even necessary because they were a sedevacantist. So if you believe the truth, you don't have to worry about, accidentally going to this so-called priest or anything, because if you avoid sedevacantists, you're going to avoid them as long as they're still a sedevacantist, So yeah, so what I'm saying is basically 99% of sedevacantists, so-called priests and bishops, are either, well, they are heretics. 99% of them are heretics teaching Fenianism or indifferentism. And then the ones who don't clearly teach Fenianism and indifferentism, they don't really seem to understand church teaching properly, So they may believe the truth, but is not they don't have that clear, firm understanding, or is they're not highly competent in that subject, which is a major issue, and I find it quite horrible. And it's weird because the same sedevacantist that I spoke about in previous sections, who was basically a friend with a Feniite, and one day he'd say he knows what baptism of desire is, then 2 days later he doesn't know what it is. And he told me about the Protestant teaching people about Jesus, or talking about Jesus in his videos, and he was happy and stuff. That same person. This guy was going to, I think, Charles Maguire. He's part of the organization called, quote unquote, Saint Gertrude the Great. I honestly, I'm highly considering no longer referring to these organizations just plainly as they're calling themselves. Like, for example, the Diamonds call their organization Most Holy Family Monastery, right? And I'm like, they're heretics, man. I shouldn't just call them Most Holy Family, because that's just, it's like an insult to the Holy Family, So the so-called Most Holy Family Monastery is what I'm considering starting to say, speak in that manner instead. So the so-called, St. Gertrude the Great organization, this sedevacantist guy was going to their so-called masses, I believe, for many years. And he'd gone to several quote unquote masses by this Charles Maguire guy who claims to be a bishop. And I personally emailed Charles Maguire. We're going to cover this in a later section, but I'm just going to give a brief point here. I personally emailed Charles Maguire about salvation to ask his belief on salvation. And he responded professing indifferentist, blasphemy, and heresy, right? And the guy, the same sedevacantist, was very troubled, and he was shocked, and he was, disturbed by it and stuff. And he told me, basically, he apologized for not having investigated Charles Maguire's beliefs himself before. And I don't remember if I said this to him. I don't recall if I said this to him, but how could you go to someone's so-called mass in the midst of the great apostasy, where basically all these people are just heretics and blasphemers and pagans and stuff, and not inquire diligently as to what they believe before you go there? That doesn't make any sense to me. That doesn't make any sense to me at all. That makes no sense. But all right, let's continue here. This is an article from TCW about Our Lady of Fatima. It says, Fatima foretold sede impediti, persecution of true popes. All right. Oh, and I should mention too, sedevacantists, on TCW's website, they condemn sedevacantists as schismatics. Okay, so that bolsters my point even more that they're not the Catholic hierarchy. I'm not even talking from a schismatic point of view. I'm talking straight up just from the fact that they're just running around teaching nothing but heresy, All right, continuing though. Fatima foretold sede impediti, persecution of true popes. It says, you see how, these are just some quotes, I believe. Right. And it's a very brief, article here. You see hell, where the souls of poor sinners go. If people do not stop offending God, he is going to punish the world for its crimes by means of war, of hunger, and of persecution of the church and of the Holy Father. Our Lady of Fatima, 1917 AD. Notice persecution of the church and of the Holy Father. So Our Lady of Fatima, once again, speaks of the Pope being persecuted. Okay? Not sedevacantism. All right? Continuing. Oh yeah, it's kind of obvious. The Pope can't be persecuted if there's no Pope, okay? So Our Lady of Fatima is talking about a Pope being persecuted during this horrible crisis. It says, note, overall, people have not stopped offending God. As a result, God has punished the world via the worst persecution of the guide to heaven, the Holy Fathers, in history. Gregory the 17th, 1958 to 1989, had, and Gregory the 18th, 1991 to present, has suffered under what the church defines as sede impediti. That is, when a bishop of Rome, in this case, the Pope, is impeded by outside forces from publicly acting in his office, which is rightfully his de jure by law. The shepherdess Jacinta Marto, who had a special vision of at least one of the impeded popes of the underground church, would say, "Poor Holy Father, we must pray very much for him." Of course, Catholics must financially support the Pope too. Security. The message of Fatima, even in this latest of hours, still holds out hope, provided we act. There is no problem, I tell you, no matter how difficult it is, that we cannot resolve by the prayer of the Holy Rosary. With the Holy Rosary, we will save ourselves, we will sanctify ourselves, we will console our Lord and obtain the salvation of many souls. Sister Lucy of Fatima, December 26, 1957. Okay? So yeah, the Pope is being persecuted, just as Our Lady of Fatima said, just as Our Lady of Salette said, just as tons upon tons of other prophecies said that you're going to, God willing, see in this section here.